I want to dispel the notion that Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the presidency. This is my second video on this. The first video laid out all the important numbers. Here's some more stuff. I was reading, this is from California Green Party. And they say dispelling the myth of the election 2000. Nader, they say the Florida. So there's so many things people don't talk about. They don't talk about that 200,000 Democrats voted for George Bush. They don't talk about that. 200,000 Democrats voted for George Bush instead of voting for Al Gore in Florida. But here's another thing they don't talk about. The Florida Secretary of State. Remember, Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida at the time, the brother of George Bush running the state where all the shenanigans happens. That Secretary of State hired a private firm known as Database Technologies, now ChoicePoint Corporation, to identify convicted felons and remove them from Florida's voting rolls. Prior to the election, 94,000 voters were removed. So in Florida, the Secretary of State, who works for Bush, goes, hey, we got to somehow make sure he wins this state because it looks like he's going to lose. So they go, I know, we'll kick off a lot of the people who are normally going to vote for a Democrat, like minorities. And what do? We'll hire a company and we'll tell them just be as reckless as possible and kick as many black people you can off the rolls. And they did it. They kicked off 94,000 of them. This kicked them off the rolls. And this is legal if someone has been convicted of a felony, but it turns out 97% were innocent. So 97% of those 90-some thousand people who the Secretary of State in Florida kicked off the voting rolls should not have been kicked off. So that right there, election fraud, you're suppressing the vote, Hank.
Wait, wasn't that because their names were similar?
Well, here, I'll tell you what it was. I'll tell you. The list was full of mistakes, mainly because of the criteria that was used. It compared its list of felons with the Florida voting rolls by looking for a rough match between the names and date of birth. So for instance, someone named Christine Smith could have been disqualified if there had been a Christopher Smith of the same age with a felony record somewhere in the United States. The database company also used race as a matching criterion, skewing the impact of the errors given more against black voters. So this is a targeted, again, now this is real election fraud.
How is that legal? Like, how is the people who do this not in jail?
Because she's the law.
Right,
she's the Secretary of State. They get to do whatever they want. And then the Supreme Court is completely corrupted because they were appointed by the guy who's running for the presidency, his dad.
It's so
It's
crazy.
like we're living in a banana republic. It's like we're in a third world. This is the kind of shit you hear about happening in Haiti. No, it happened right here in America.
Man.
That's right. The contested election gets overturned in the state run by the guy's brother.
Catherine Harris was George Bush's campaign
manager for the state. The Nation magazine reported, quote, immediately after the November 7, 2000 election, minority voters who had never committed crimes complained of having had their names removed from voting rolls in a purge of ex-felons and of being denied translation services required by law, and of harassment by poll workers and law enforcement officials. So they're harassing people who are trying to vote. They're not giving them translation, which they're supposed to. And they're kicking people off the voting rolls saying they're felons, even though they're not. 97% of the people they kicked off weren't felons. The list of voters denied the right to vote was overwhelmingly Democratic, and half were minorities. Al Gore neither protested the disenfranchisement nor supported these voters' lawsuit to regain their vote. So those people were upset that they weren't allowed to vote. And so were their representatives. Their African-American representatives in Congress were upset. Now, in a joint session of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate met to certify the election results of the 2000 election. Al Gore, in his dual role of outgoing vice president and president of the Senate, presided over the event that would officially anoint George W. Bush President of the United States. Now, here's the key. If any congressman wanted to raise an objection about the certification of the election, the rules insisted that he get a signature and the support of at least one U.S. senator. I'm going to show you the video. This is from Farenheit 9/11. This is them trying to raise objections about all those people being purged from the voter rolls. And this is from that movie. And it's pretty sad. So let's watch it.
Mr. President, and I take great pride in calling you that. I must object because of the overwhelming evidence of official misconduct, deliberate fraud, and an attempt to suppress voter turnout.
The chair must remind members that under Section 18 of Title III, United States Code, no debate is allowed in the joint session.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer your question, Mr.
So that's Al Gore overseeing this.
President, the objection is in writing, signed by a number of members of the House of Representatives, but not by a member of the Senate.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by several House colleagues on behalf and myself of the 27,000 voters of Duval County, in which 16,000 of them are African Americans that was disenfranchised in this last election.
Is the objection signed by a member of the Senate?
Not signed by a member of the Senate. The Senate is missing.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself on behalf of many of the diverse constituents in our country.
So all that stuff I just told you about how they disenfranchised black voters in Florida and how there was a sham election. And there's Al Gore just going right along. Who cares? We're not going to investigate it. They stole an election. There was a coup in America. Who cares? Who cares? George Bush isn't that much different than me anyway. Sure, he's going to start an illegal, insane war, but 60% of the Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, are going to go along with it. We're for this stuff.
Those in the 9th Congressional District and all American voters who recognize that the Supreme Court, not the people of the United States, decided this election.
Is the objection signed by a senator?
Unfortunately, Mr. President, it is not signed by one single senator.
Unfortunately, I have no authority over the United States Senate, and no senator has signed.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself and several of my constituents from Florida. A senator is needed, but missing.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a member of the House and a senator?
The objection is in writing, and I don't care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate.
The chair will advise that the rules do care, and the signature.
So not only would Al Gore not step up for himself or the American people, but he won't stand up for those disenfranchised black voters in Florida. And he's going to let the government be taken over by someone who stole the election on purpose, standing up there in his $5,000 suit, sitting there with all his corporate money jammed up his ass. And not only did he not stand up for the people he's supposed to stand up for, but the people who are standing up for the people, he's ridiculing them and mocking them. You think Ralph Nader ever mocked disenfranchised black people who were denied to vote in Florida? You know who did? Al Gore. Al Gore wouldn't even stand up for himself.
The senator.
Not a single senator came to the aid of the African Americans in Congress. One after another, they were told to sit down and shut up.
And it's a sad day in America, Mr. President, when we can't find a senator to sign objections.
The gentleman will suspend.
Won't sign objections, Mr. President.
The gentleman will suspend.
And there is Al Gore. Won't stand up for himself. Won't stand up for the American people. Won't stand up for black people who were knocked off the voting rolls illegally. Won't stand up for the rule of law. Won't stand up for a goddamn thing. And you wonder why people think Democrats are wimps? The guy won't even stand up to a coup that took place from him. And he's gabbling down the people who are pointing out how corrupt it was. The election that screwed him over. He's shut up. This isn't about that. It's about one word. It's like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. You ain't in it. Those black people aren't in it. People forget this is what happened, too. This is also from that movie on the inauguration. People forgot.
The gentleman will suspend.
Inauguration coverage, 2001, on a nasty but it could be worse kind of day in Washington.
Horrible day. People still show up to protest. People still showed up to protest.
On the day George W. Bush was inaugurated, tens of thousands of Americans poured into the streets of D.C. in one last attempt to reclaim what had been taken from them. They pelted Bush's limo with eggs and brought the inauguration parade to a halt. The plan to have Bush get out of the limo for the traditional walk to the White House was scrapped. Bush's limo hit the gas to prevent an even larger riot. No president had ever witnessed such a thing on his inauguration day.
And that's the power of the people. And I think that's, we did it in Occupy Wall Street. Anyway, we need to do this stuff again and make our rulers afraid of us. Chris Hedges tells a story that Henry Kissinger, there was protesters outside, thousands of them outside the White House. And Nixon turns to Kissinger and said, Henry, I'm afraid if they break through the barricades, they'll come for us and kill us. And that's exactly where our leaders should be. They should be afraid of us. And it wasn't Ralph Nader. And those same people telling you don't vote for a third party are these are the people. These are them. Al Gore's of the world, who's okay with George Bush being president, who's okay with black people being kicked off the rolls. Or Al Gore, what a waste of a politician. Let's also remember that it was not Ralph Nader, because if they would have continued counting the votes in Florida, which legally they were supposed to do, because the Supreme Court of Florida said, hey, we need to recount these votes. They were going to recount them, and Al Gore would again won. But the Supreme Court stepped in and stopped it. They've never did that before. And they did it on a 5-4 vote, completely partisan, upturning precedents, which they're not supposed. So it was corrupt from start to finish, this election. And Al Gore wouldn't stand up to it. In fact, Justice Paul Stevens wrote in his dissenting opinion, though we may never know with complete certainty the identity of the winner of this year's presidential election, the identity of the loser is perfectly clear. It is the nation's confidence in the judge as an impartial guardian of the rule of law. Also, Ginsburg and Breyer joined into that opinion. Still going to blame Ralph Nader? 200,000 Democrats vote for him. They purged 90,000 something black people off the votes. Al Gore doesn't stand up or say anything. Nothing. Nope. Couldn't win his own home state. Still, nope. Virginia, West Virginia, they lose. Democrats never. Nope. Still Ralph Nader, right? Still the guy who's calling out bullshit. We're a nation of alcoholics in America. We don't get mad at the guy who's pummeling us. We get mad at the guy who points out the guy's pummeling us. That's Ralph Nader. And now it's Jill Stein. And people are coming to have that. And watch it, too, when establishment Democrats, when they try to discredit, when they try to debate or whatever, someone to the left of them, they first discredit them. They did it to Bernie. They couldn't go after his policies, so they had to say he was a misogynist and a sexist and all this. He's grumpy. They do it to Jill Stein. She's anti-science. She's a doctor. They're doing it right, and she's all this. They red baited her. She's with friends. I got pictures of her with Putin. Oh God! And they do the same thing to Ralph. They did the same thing to Ralph Nader. They smear him because you can't argue his ideas. They can't argue his ideas. So they smear him, they marginalize him, they shut up, and you better give your vote to the military-industrial complex. You better give your vote to Wall Street. You better give your vote to fracking. You better give your vote to Big Pharma, or else you're a bad American, like Ralph Nader. So there it is. Didn't happen. Don't let anybody tell you Ralph Nader cost him the election. What cost the election was corruption and people already sick and tired of neoliberalism. And 200,000 Democrats voting for George Bush.